And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. This is our 52nd edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 347th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, November 9th, 2017. I am your host, Jared Morris. And let's begin this week how we begin every episode of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And the banner moment is pretty simple for me this week. It occurred on Wednesday when all four committed members of Indiana's class of 2018 signed on the dotted line. Jerome Hunter, Rob Phinisee, Jake Forrester, and Damezi Anderson all had pledged that they would be playing for Archie Miller, all signed. And look, we're all still awaiting the final word from Romeo Langford and Darius Garland, two five-star guys. But regardless of what they do, Archie Miller already has a foundational class to now build his program on. And it's a class that reminds me a lot of Tom Crean's first big class at Indiana when he signed Maurice Creek and Christian Watford and Jordan Hulls and Derek Elston. And, you think about those great teams in 2012 and 2013, and obviously Victor Oladipo and Cody Zeller and others were huge parts of those teams. But that first recruiting class really laid the foundation. And I think these four guys, plus Race Thompson that Archie Miller brought in, can do the same thing for the Indiana program moving forward. So a huge moment for Indiana, for really terrific players, and we will talk a little bit more about them as we move forward on this episode of the Assembly Call. All right, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left, we have a man who should be wearing gold all week in honor of Robert Johnson getting the gold practice jersey, and he is a world-renowned bracketologist whose work has now graduated from the humble pages of assemblycall.com to the esteemed limelight of InsideTheHall.com. He is Andy Bottoms. Andy, what is your Bottoms line from the past week in IU basketball?
Well, gold's a little bit too close to Purdue colors for my liking, so I'm not sure that I own anything gold at all. But on the inside, I'm beaming, obviously. It's to me, it's just the season actually is here finally. This has certainly been the most. Well, maybe not the most. We've had some eventful off seasons since we started doing the show. The most best eventful, maybe you could say, I guess, as we look forward. So it's nice to actually finally have things here. Some of the speculation can end. We got a little bit of dose of what this team might look like in the exhibition season, but I think finally we are able to see the start of the Archie Miller era, and I think that by any measure that's really exciting. Obviously the recruiting news that you mentioned in the banner moment is exciting as well, and that's been a big part of the offseason. But now we're finally ready for actual basketball, and we'll see if this team can really come out and prove people wrong. And the first chance to step down that path is on Friday against Indiana State. So should be exciting. I think, the fan base, as we've done the show, there certainly have been exciting times, but there's just a different feel to the interactions that we've had and the, just kind of the sentiment of people in the fan base. So it's an exciting time for everybody.
And now to my right, ladies and gentlemen, we have an opinionated sports writer who plans to fully explore the studio space with the extra 140 characters per tweet that he now has at his disposal. He's a columnist for The Big Lead and someone who, under no circumstances, would ever think about shoplifting in China unless he knew he could pin it on Coach K, in which case he wouldn't think twice. He is Ryan Phillips. Ryan, what is your Indiana basketball specific rant this week?
I definitely would not think twice about that. I actually want to say something related to that. I just want to thank Archie Miller and Indiana's players for not going to a foreign country to open the season at a weird time where I have to wake up at odd hours to watch the game, and B, for not stealing anything in a foreign country where you could get locked up for a very long time. I mean, rule number one in my Keys to Life book that I'll write someday is don't get arrested in China. But I think number two is don't get arrested in Mexico. But they're right there with each other. And, this UCLA
rule number one in my book is don't buy Ryan's book about the rules to life.
That's probably, I mean, I'm glad you're a parent because you can tell your kids that. And that's a good idea. No, it's something like that. I think that you just feel like, I mean, maybe I'm jinxing it, but you just feel like this team is on such a solid footing, and these players and this staff are in a place where you just know they're not screwing around. And I feel like UCLA fans have had to just explain this to people and have had to answer embarrassing questions, and the athletic department as well has had to. And he's just such a disaster. And it makes me happy to be a Hoosier fan, where, our scandals are normal college scandals, not, Louisville scandals or, shoplifting in China scandals. So I just want to say, I appreciate what this staff has done. I appreciate where this team is. I appreciate the effort they're putting in. And quite frankly, I'm ready to start a season where there's no controversy. I know we've still got a few hours left until tip for somebody to do something.
Don't jinx it.
Well, that's why I said that. I've got to throw that out there. So yeah, I think it's nice to not have to face things like off-season uncertainty and craziness. And Andy's right. There is a positive feeling about this team, and some excitement and some we're genuinely looking forward to it. So I would say that's where I'm at right now. And I'm excited for tomorrow, and I'm excited for our first post-game show of the year.
Absolutely. All righty. Well, we have a jam-packed show for you this week. I had a chance to talk with Indiana Now signee Rob Phinisee on Wednesday night, and it's a great interview. We're going to play it in our next segment. He discusses why he chose IU, what Archie Miller is like away from the court, and most interestingly to me, what he thinks about Indiana's pursuit of a guy who plays the same position as him, Darius Garland. Then in our third segment, it's kind of going to be some potpourri. We'll talk about Andy's preseason bracketology, give our predictions for the 2017-18 season, and then you all sent in a lot of questions, and so we will get to those as well and just have some fun here in the final episode before the season begins. All of that coming here on Assembly Call Radio. Do want to issue this quick reminder: the next time you're looking for tickets to a sporting event or concert, remember our friends at SeatGeek. You can download their app, which is incredibly convenient and easy to use, or if you just want an easy-to-remember URL that will take you directly to the IU basketball ticket listings on SeatGeek's website, here it is, iutickets.shop. For example, do you want tickets to see Indiana upset Duke on November 29th? Or how about the Big Ten home opener against Iowa on December 4th? Tickets are available for every game on IU's schedule, including the road games. Check out the latest ticket deals on the SeatGeek app, or, again, iutickets.shop. And if it's your first time using SeatGeek, don't forget the promo code ASSEMBLY. Use it when you make your first purchase, and you will get $20 back after that purchase. Again, the promo code is ASSEMBLY. All right, you're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. And guys, quickly here, obviously the big news right before we went live, Evan Daniels, among others, reported that Darius Garland will announce his college choice next Wednesday at 5:30 Central at Brentwood Academy. Want to get your guys' quick reaction to this. Obviously, if you don't have a schedule handy, that is basically right when Indiana's game against Seton Hall tips. So, I hesitate to kind of read too much into these things, but my gut reaction is that that's not the greatest of signs. How do you kind of respond to that news? Ryan, you go first.
I don't put too much stock into that, but I think that some people, what I put more stock into isn't the timing of the announcement or anything like that. It's the fact that a lot of people think he's trending away from Indiana right now and maybe thinking about staying home.
Yeah.
And so that would lead us to believe that Vanderbilt is possibly the destination. Again, these are all rumors. We don't know what that kid's gonna say. We assume he's made up his mind if he's making an announcement, but you never know. Sometimes these kids are down to 2 and they just say, I'm gonna make myself figure it out before my season starts. So I look, we don't know. I think obviously of the 2 left, I think there's far more pull to Indiana for Romeo Langford. So I think Darius Garland was always thought of more as, a huge bonus. But if you don't get him, you don't feel like you really lost something enormous. I mean, he's a great player, but you have a point guard in this class in Robert Phinisee, and you feel like there's way more of a need to land Romeo Langford than Darius Garland. So I think that while he'd be great to get, don't get me wrong, I think that he has always been viewed more as sort of the bonus guy. Andy, quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think when you look at the point guard position, if Devontae can continue on the trajectory that he seems to be on at the start of this year, he probably enters next season as a starting point guard, and Phinisee is a guy who can learn from him.
All righty. Well, coming up on the Assembly Call, speaking of Robert Phinisee, we will play for you my interview with the Indiana signee. What does he think of Indiana recruiting Darius Garland? I ask him. That's next. Nice job there, Andy, getting in and out quickly.
No.
All right. Hello to everybody on YouTube. So I did the interview with Rob Phinisee Wednesday night. So obviously, we're not going to play that right now, but it'll be on the podcast. So when you listen to the podcast, it'll be there. And I may try and upload that separately so that you can just listen to that separately on YouTube as well. But we will, for the rest of tonight, we will skip ahead to segments 3 and 4. Yeah. And I did one thing I had in my notes that I wanted to make mention of that we didn't have time to get there, especially if you're new and you were looking for a little bit more expansive talk about the recruits, which we would have loved to dive into more. Our previous episodes, we did really detailed scouting reports of Jerome Hunter, Damezi Anderson, Rob Phinisee, and Jake Forrester. So episode 328 was Hunter and Anderson. Episode 333 was Phinisee, and 336 was Forrester. So you can go back in the YouTube feed or in the podcast feed and get our detailed scouting reports of each guy there.
I was actually going to ask you to look those up. I wasn't sure what the numbers were.
Yep. So that is those, and
Well done, Jared.
I'll put those in the show notes as well. Yeah, man, that segment went fast. Holy moly! But we got to do what we got to do, right?
True.
Okay. So for this segment, gentlemen, and feel free in the chat if you have some specific things that you'd like us to cover in segments 3 and 4. I'll be watching. So let us know, because it's kind of going to be a bit of a potpourri segment here. So Andy, let's start with your bracketology, and let's just hit that real quick. We can call you out for not including Indiana, because that's ridiculous.
Do you want to do any preview of the game tomorrow?
I mean, we can do some. Andy can give a little preview.
So this
we can also refer people back to the exhibition post game show, because we did some preview there, and I don't want to. We only have like 24 minutes here, so I don't want to spend too much time.
It feels like though, is this going to air on the radio right before pretty close to the game, isn't it?
Yeah, so maybe we do a little bit of that at the end of segment 4.
Okay, just let Andy go nuts on that.
Yeah, Andy, we'll save like 2 minutes for that and give some quick thoughts on. I mean, Archie has spoken really, really highly of them. And he, all coaches do that for all opponents, but he, I think they'll come in ready to play. So, and they've got good experienced guards. So I don't think it's going to be a walk in the park. Everybody wants to win at Assembly Hall. Yes, they do, including Duke, but they won't. Okay, so let's start out with a little bit of bracketology, and we don't need to dive too much into it. Let's stay IU specific on it, but basically why you think Indiana didn't make it. And let's just do some preseason predictions. Also, I can start with mine because I did that on the episode of Crimson Cast. Record-wise, I had 21-9 and 11-7. Have you guys looked at it enough to give records, or do you want to be more general?
No.
I did today because I thought that you might ask. So let me.
Why don't you mention that why don't you give a record prediction in your bracketology segment, and I'll just nod, because I have not looked closely enough at it yet. Okay. I probably will tomorrow at some point Okay. And then we'll kind of go through and just I'll ask you guys a few questions. We can just spitball a little bit. They'll be easy for you to answer. Cool.
Okay.
All right, let's do this. So segment 3. Okay. You guys ready?
Yep.
Okay. You are listening to the Assembly Call. Go to assemblycall.com/join right now to learn how to subscribe to our email newsletter. If you want to get more out of being an IU basketball fan, then you need to be on our newsletter list. You will get our weekly 6-banner Sunday news roundups, as well as our post-game analysis emails. It is all free, and it will make you a smarter IU basketball fan. Again, the URL is assemblycall.com/join. I am Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, my co-hosts on the Assembly Call IU postgame show. Hopefully you enjoyed our chat with Rob Phinisee. But guys, let's jump in and start talking about the current Hoosiers and kind of look ahead to this season. And Andy, I'd like to start with you because as we mentioned in segment 1, your bracketology columns are now running on InsideTheHall.com, which I'm very excited about because obviously, they have a huge audience over there. And I'm excited that your work, which is so good and so consistent year in, year out, will get more eyeballs on it and more attention. And that was kind of one of our main goals in moving that content over there. So number one, congratulations to you. And number two, shame on you for not including Indiana in your initial preseason bracketology. And it made me feel even better about not having that drivel on assemblycall.com anymore.
What a jerk, right? What a jerk.
Fantastic. I just wanted to endear myself to the people there immediately. So I thought that was the best way to do it, was to drum up some controversy. No, so thank you. And obviously thanks to Alex Bozich for, we kind of had some discussions about having it over there. And as you have with Podcasts on the Brink, a good partnership with them. And I think it makes sense for a lot of reasons. So looking forward to that over the course of the season. I mean, as for IU specifically, they were a team that I did consider. It's one of those where you tend to be a little bit harder on a team that you follow and that you cover, I think, in some ways, to try to take out any bias that you might have personally in the situation. So there was part of that. I mean, and the other part was, quite honestly, I mean, I think there's still a lot of questions about this team in terms of how the rotation is going to play out, and whether guys, once the level of competition ramps up, who really the go-to guys are, how this team's going to be able to, how quickly they'll pick up the system offensively and defensively. And, I think in many ways you can look at the exhibition season and say, hey, if they can carry over the turnover piece and some of the defensive things we've seen, then yeah, I'm probably going to end up being wrong. But at this point, it's kind of leaving it out there to, to kind of prove it. I think they're going to be right there in the mix of a pretty crowded middle of the Big Ten, and they were just, outside the field. It was funny. There were some people that as soon as, seeds like 9 through 13 went up, there were a couple people who joked like, oh, IU must be an 8. Like, and then there are other people who are like, well, where are they? What's going on? So it was, it was good. So they were in the mix. Would not at all be surprised to see them make it eventually, and certainly hope that they do. But for now, just until we see them against a little bit better competition, a bit hard to say. And as we've talked about on here, the non-conference schedule has those 4 really hard games. And if they don't win any of those, which I certainly hope doesn't happen, but certainly is realistic, they really could have to post a pretty gaudy conference record to be able to make up for that.
Yeah, I'm on record from earlier in the offseason saying that I think Indiana will finish 5th in the Big Ten, defying the low expectations. And I did a podcast with Galen Clavio on Crimson Cast, where we went game by game, and I ended up having Indiana at 21-9 and 11-7 in the conference. Struggling early, but really picking up the pace toward the end of the season and finishing strong, in part because that's what Archie did pretty much every year at Dayton. His teams finished strong. He was almost always, 9-3 or 8-2, something like that, down the stretch. I'm curious, from your perspective, obviously those 4 non-conference games are huge. I think Indiana's going to win 2 of them. I think they're going to beat Duke, and I think they're going to win one of the other ones. I think the Notre Dame one is probably the most likely, just because it's not on the road. But outside of those games, did you go game by game, and are there any other kind of pivotal, maybe swing games in Big Ten play that you think could really, especially since it's expected to be so jumbled in the conference, that you think could really swing it one way or the other for Indiana when it comes to, being on the bubble or off?
Yeah, so for the purpose of the bracketology, I did not go through team by team for IU or really anybody. It was just more based on kind of where I projected them kind of in the pecking order of the league, and same thing with other leagues. But I did go through and do this because I listened to you and Galen go through that process and thought that maybe you'd ask. So I ended up at 19-11 and 10-8 in the league. There was a game or two I was on the fence about. So I kind of stepped back and looked and said, could they really, if you didn't look game by game, but you just kind of said, hey, they're going to win all of this certain set of games, are they really going to do that? So for me, one of the ones that I ended up kind of switching was the road game at Illinois. I think the big games for me are, obviously we think this team's going to play well at home. We know what Assembly Hall can be like. And so I think there are a lot of things to like there. When you look at road games, and this comes as part of that, kind of late season stretch that you talked about, I think, a lot of the early road games are difficult. Certainly Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan State, the first 3, I guess not the first 3 anymore. So Michigan in December, then Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan State, 4 pretty tough ones to start. Now, once you get past that, you've got a set of Illinois, Ohio State, Rutgers is the next 3 on the road, then Iowa, then Nebraska. So the winnable ones out of that would seem to be Illinois, Ohio State, Rutgers, Nebraska for sure. if the team is as good as we think. And I ended up giving them a loss in one of those because I just don't know if that's too much to expect that they're going to win that many road games. So I think
it's worth noting that all three of those come on the second game of one of those 2 games in 3-day stretches, which is going to be tough. But
yeah. So I think those are, while not consecutive, are swing games that can really be a big deal. I mean, we know how important, picking up road wins can be. And I think there's some that are going to be really hard to get. So it becomes really important to get the kind of 50-50 ones that are against teams that are projected at least around where IU is. And that's really where ultimately Ohio State, Illinois, Rutgers, and to a lesser extent, Nebraska really are. So can you win all 4 of those games? That would be awesome. And I think if you win all 4 of those, then yeah, you probably got a relatively good shot at getting 11 wins in the league, because you'd have to go 7-2 at home, which I think feels reasonable. So it's really, to me, a lot of, can you win all 4 of those? Can you win your 4 most winnable road games out front? And if you do that, then I think not only does it help you in the league standings, but it also helps as the selection committee has kind of gone to that different criteria where they're bucketing wins a little bit differently, and road wins, even against lesser teams, count a little bit more as you start looking at, what kind of column or tier those wins fall into.
Yeah. And look, I'm trusting a new mentality under Archie Miller, plus the experience of all the seniors, to be able to push Indiana to get some of those wins later in the season, when hopefully the team is kind of gelled and is more comfortable in the system. Ryan, I'm not going to ask if you did your homework of going game by game, because I'm quite sure that you didn't. But what's your general take on this team? I mean, where are you at right now after watching a couple exhibition games? What's your gut feeling? Is this an NCAA tournament team?
I have looked at, obviously I've looked at the schedule. I've looked at where we're at. We've discussed it before on the show. I have not gone game by game and picked a record yet, because I haven't seen this team play enough. And, I almost feel like it's a futile exercise. For me, I think that Andy can do it based on the statistics and everything that he puts together and compiles, and looking at past Archie Miller teams and things like that. I'm less of a stats guy and more of show me something. And I think we'll have a better idea by the time they're heading to Seton Hall, whether I think they can win some of these bigger games. And I think that how you're going to perform in those bigger, more competitive games is going to tell you how you're going to do in your schedule. Because I think there are games in the Big Ten. Look, I think you're going to definitely, even if you're the best team in the Big Ten, you're going to lose one bad one every year. I mean, almost every year, a Big Ten contender loses an inexplicable game. You're going to win one you weren't supposed to, definitely, at least. And so you just got to find out where those are on the schedule and pinpoint them, and then you can further guess out. But I would say that I think this team is going to be better than the national media thinks, because, again, I think everybody is downgrading these guys based on last year. When going into last year, these guys were recognized, a lot of these guys on this team were recognized as having a lot of talent and being competitive nationally. People forget they beat Kansas to open the season. This team could compete on a level, but when things started going badly last year, it dragged everybody else down. And the nationally, people saw the record, they saw the NIT berth, they saw the coach getting fired. They didn't see what these guys could actually do. And so I think that that's important. I think this could go one of 2 ways. These guys could rise to those heights, or it could just be a battle all season to get these systems down and maybe for Archie to get his guys, the guys that he trusts and the guys that fit his system, into the game. But right now, I'm cautiously optimistic that you'll see that cream rise to the top for these guys again.
You're listening to the Assembly Column. Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. Yeah, I mean, and Ryan, you mentioned, Indiana beat Kansas last year. And one of the reasons why Indiana beat Kansas last year is because they had a guy in James Blackman Jr. who at times could just be absolutely magnificent as a scorer. And he was just unbelievable that game, and went and got buckets and made shots and did that in a few of Indiana's big wins. And I think one of the big questions for this year's team is, where do those points come from? Who is going to be the go-to scorer? And we got a question. We can jump ahead to one of the questions that we got. I think it's a good one from Shane. He wonders, who do you think will be the leading scorer, and who will be the most surprising player? And so I think that's an interesting question as we look ahead to the season. Andy, I'll go to you first. I mean, I'm almost certain that you're going to choose Robert Johnson as the leading scorer. And I think based on what you've seen in the exhibition games, he's been, kind of playing like a volume shooter a little bit. And it certainly seems like he'll have the opportunities to be that guy.
Yeah, I think he would seem to me to be the favorite to lead the team in scoring. I think he's going to have the ball in his hands a decent amount, even though he's not going to run the point, and certainly hasn't been shy about shooting. And I thought certainly in the second exhibition game a bit more than the first, balanced where he took his shots a little bit better, and maybe that's just seeing him actually knock down a couple threes after being a little bit worried about his shooting in the first couple times that we saw him. So I think he would be the favorite for that. But I do think it's a pretty big leap for him, for as much as he, I think he scored on average more than people probably realized even a season ago. But it's a pretty big leap to be, if you would have, kind of ranked the late game options last year, he's making a pretty big jump from where you would have put him in the pecking order in late game situations last year to being what is likely the guy who's going to be counted on in those scenarios this year. So I certainly hope he's up to it. But it is a big leap for him. And even for a guy who's been pretty consistent and productive, he now has to be not only consistent, but consistently great.
Surprising player. Who do you have for that one?
Boy, that's tough. I think a guy who I really like what Freddie McSwain did on Sunday. And I think he might play more than people think. And so I just feel like he's going to be a guy who, while even coming into the season, maybe people didn't expect a lot of. I don't think he's not going to average double figures. He's not going to do those kinds of things, but I think he's going to become a really reliable guy coming off the bench and a really key part of the rotation and really build on some of the things that we saw him do toward the end of last season and become a really key part of what's going on.
Well, congratulations, Andy. It seems as if you stole Ryan's answer. So Ryan's going to now have to choose his second most surprising player.
No, I'm sticking with Freddie McSwain.
About it, but I don't know. I felt like the Devontae Green, 2 weeks ago, Devontae Green would have been an interesting answer, but now I don't feel like you can. Now I don't feel like you can throw that one out there. So
no, it's not surprising anymore if he's good. My prediction last week was that Devontae Green would lead the team in assists off the bench, and I stick with that. I don't think he's going to be surprising at all. I would say I think Andy's right that Robert Johnson will lead the team in scoring, but there's a caveat, and that's his three-point shooting has to get better. His three-point shooting dropped from 44.7% to 37% last year. He took more.
It's because he's not getting as many catch and shoot opportunities. I mean, you can look deep into the numbers and synergy.
Absolutely.
It's not a coincidence that Yogi Ferrell leaves and a great catch and shoot guy, his percentage goes down.
And his field goal percentage stayed the same at 44.9. So his other stuff clearly was the same, but he was not hitting threes at the same rate. And you're right. It was because the floor wasn't spaced well enough. He wasn't getting catch and shoot opportunities. He was having to dribble and force shots more. That has to change this year. And it's not just on him. It's on everybody else. This is a guy who can shoot 45% from three. We've seen it before. It's a matter of getting him the opportunities to make those shots. And if you do that, you can have a guy who can knock down shots and big opportunities. And as Dan Dockich, I'm sure, will point out, Dan Dockich, big fan of the show, will point out that he likes the right corner three, or right wing three. So he'll point that out every single time Robert Johnson has the ball there. Anyway, so I think it's going to be Robert Johnson. Most surprising, I was going to say Freddie McSwain. I'll stick with that because I think that it would be a big surprise to a lot of people who watched him play last year how much he'll be in this rotation and how he'll play. And quite frankly, I think that he's a guy kind of exactly what Archie Miller wants. And that's just a ball of activity, not necessarily super big, not necessarily super long, not necessarily a perfect position fit in the post, but he's a guy who's got a ton of energy and can make some things happen.
Yeah. For scoring, I think Robert Johnson is obviously the easy answer. He makes the most sense. I think if we look at it from a points per minute, I think Deron Davis could challenge him. The big difference between those two is just that, it's going to really take Deron some work to get up to playing enough minutes. I mean, Robert is in incredible condition. There could be games where Robert Johnson's playing 36, 37 minutes this year, just as an experienced guard who can do so many things. And Deron, he played 24 minutes the other night, and that's the most that he's played. And Archie has talked about, if we can get him playing 28, 30 minutes, how big that will be for the team. And that's a function of both stamina and not fouling. And so that's why I thought what he showed in the exhibition game was so encouraging to me. that he, seems to be kind of on track to getting there. Obviously, it'll, take him several weeks of actually playing in games to get in shape. So I'm feeling better than I was, last week about, what Duran can do this season after watching that exhibition game. And so I think he can be a guy, if we're looking at points per minute. And then in terms of surprise players, look, I think Al Durham can be that guy, frankly, because I wasn't expecting that much from him. I don't think a lot of people were. And yet you hear Archie talk, and he's really excited about Al, and seems like of the three freshmen, the guy closest to the rotation right now. And so especially if he can come in and make shots, which was, supposed to be his big weakness, he'll get some more time out there. So I think just based on what we've heard and a little bit of what we saw in that exhibition game, I would peg Al as my surprising player. And that is because I think Curtis Jones and Devontae Green will be better. I don't think they'll be stars. I don't think they'll necessarily be starters all season long. So that won't surprise me when they fill that role. So that's why I'm saying Al for most surprising player.
I got a question for you guys. Who led the team in minutes per game last year?
Who led the team in minutes per game last year?
Your first thought?
Robert?
Robert, right?
No, James Blackman Jr., 30.5. Robert was 29.4.
Well,
surprising. Josh Newkirk averaged 28. Thomas Bryant averaged 28. So they were even. I mean,
there was a lot of accountability for defense last year. I mean,
that's interesting. Robert played the most minutes last year, but James sat out for 4 games. So,
yeah.
But as far as average, I did not know that Blackman was the leading minutes guy. And it's interesting that and then Josh Newkirk, who, at times seemed like was basically rotated as a bench player, averaged the third most minutes at 28.1 per game, tied with Thomas Bryant. So that's interesting to me.
I mean, it was a team that had to outscore people, and by the end of the season, you didn't have very many guys left who were playing all that well, so you might as well keep him out there and hope he gets hot.
I think that's the key for what you're talking about with Al Durham, is that he's going to get on the floor because of his defense, and it's a different philosophy from Archie, is that if you can stop people, he'll put you on the floor regardless of what you do on offense. And yeah, he expects something from you on offense, but it feels like it starts from the defensive end, and then you can build the offense from there, not the other way around.
Yep. All right. Coming up in our final segment, we have a few more questions from you. We will answer those, and then we will give you a quick preview of Indiana State, the season opener for the Indiana Hoosiers. That's coming up next. All right. Very nice. That was 18 minutes and 17 seconds. That was long third segment.
How much do we have left?
I'm going to do that math right now. We have
5. Andy doing math. It's not good.
5:43 left. That means we have 5:07. We got to be out of here.
So let's do one question and then Andy's preview.
Okay.
I don't really have a ton to add more than what we had. So if we want to try to knock out a couple questions, I think we can be pretty quick with the preview.
Okay, and we'll refer people back to last episode. Let's see here. So we kind of covered the Robert Johnson question.
What's the question?
Do you think Robert Rojo becomes a leader this team needs? Will he be up for the task of being the go-to guy? I think we kind of covered that.
Yeah.
Patrick asked about Curtis Jones at the end of the season. Will Curtis Jones be a consistent player or still inconsistent?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. Okay, so who wants that one? We probably
I can take it.
Okay, so we did the leading scorer. I want to mention Brian's question because it's about Deron Davis, and he's he just weighed in at like 25, 26 pounds less. And he said that's great and all, but what's the goal with him? Agility? Come on, Boogie weighs 270 in the NBA.
Yeah, Boogie's a special.
Yeah, I mean,
guy though.
It's
very few people move as well as he does at that size.
In a variety of ways.
Yes. Very many ways. Yes.
And then Kirk's question is interesting. With Hartman healthy, how long until he is inserted into the starting lineup, or do you see his role coming off the bench? Because I could see that going a couple different ways.
You could always start him and only play him 15 minutes or whatever. I mean,
he's not on a minute restriction anymore either.
Okay, then I think he's going to start. So.
Yeah, but do you think if maybe the bench is struggling, that maybe Archie has him as a bench guy who can come stabilize things? I think he's going to start too.
It's such a hypothetical that it's kind of hard at this point. If like we could say during midseason, if the bench is struggling, hey, do you think we should do this? But right now, we don't know. We don't know if the bench is going to struggle, so it's kind of hard for me to answer that question.
Better get off to a good start.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that it's better to have your leader on the floor.
And as Archie said, who cares about who starts? It's all about who finishes anyway.
And it's so funny because coaches go to that as the excuse all the time, but it's so true. Who cares if you start?
I would not be surprised if the starting lineup is shuffled just based on practice. I mean, if starting is a reward for practice, but who finishes is based on who he trusts the most.
Yeah, no, and I think it'll also be shuffled based on matchups, knowing Archie. So
I do not expect the same starting lineup every game this year. No. I really don't. There was a coach who used to do that and change the starting lineups.
Yeah, who was that?
I don't know.
Andy? You would know. You did lineups, right? What was his name?
Yeah. Not back then.
No, not then. Not then. That was a different time.
That was a different time.
I don't know. You haven't gone back and done archived lineups?
Oh God. No.
All right, let's do this. Let's knock this out.
Okay.
Just keep us posted.
We should have just recorded that.
Yeah, that was
whatever.
That's just a gift for the people who are watching.
It's a gift.
The gift.
It's a gift. We're just giving you that for free, folks. Not
Extra
the rest
content.
of it costs, but
extra content. Okay. Let's do this. Here we go. Ready? Here we go. You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, my co-hosts on the Assembly Call IU postgame show. And guys, we've got some questions, so let's hit these quickly. Ryan, I will go to you with this one. This is from Patrick. At the end of the season, Curtis Jones, will he be a consistent player or still kind of inconsistent as he has been thus far in his career?
I hate to hedge because I would never do such a thing. I would say he's going to be a fairly consistent player. I think we're gonna start getting to know. So I will say consistent player. But since we're going 0 to 100 here, but if you want to be realistic, I would say moving towards being a consistent player. I don't know if he'll get all the way there in his sophomore year, but
yeah, that's fair. He's a sophomore, so that's
But if you have to pick one or the other, I would say consistent. I think you're going to know what you get from him. His shot may not always be consistent, his ball handling may not always be consistent, but I think you're going to know what you'll get from him and be able to rely on him for specific things. To me, that's consistent. So,
and I think he'll find more ways to score by driving and slashing, and we've seen that already in the exhibition season.
I agree with you, but you have to be able to hit a shot from the outside to get guys to give you lanes to drive, or else they'll just back off you and make you shoot. So I think he's got to be more consistent with that jumper. Doesn't have to become a 45% three-point shooter, but he's got to get better.
Yeah. Okay, let me take this real quick. Brian, I retweeted something about how Deron Davis, basically lost 25 pounds, and we've heard all about the weight loss. And Brian says, that's great and all, but what is the goal with him? Agility? Come on, Boogie weighs 270 in the NBA. Ryan, as you mentioned off air, kind of unfair to compare anybody to Boogie because he's just kind of a freakish athlete, a freakish basketball specimen. But look,
it's like comparing somebody to Shaq. I mean, he's 330 and moved like a guard. I mean, it's special.
And look, the thing with Deron, it is agility, but it's also about leaping ability, his ability to get off the ground quickly and become a better defensive rebounder, which he wasn't last year. And we saw in the exhibition game him being able to go up better and get rebounds. And also just his overall ability as an athlete to be able to move up and down the court. And most importantly, to be able to play more minutes. He's a better conditioned athlete. And having Deron Davis on the floor for 28, 29, 30 minutes is a heck of a lot better than having a bigger Deron Davis not on the floor as much. And I think being a better athlete, being more nimble on his feet will help with the fatigue, and it'll also help him not commit so many silly fouls. So I think there's a bunch of reasons why this is a good thing.
How about health, too? It's easier to stay healthy when you're in shape.
Yeah.
I mean, in better shape. It's better, like you said, on the floor, and he can run the floor now.
Yeah, no, for all those reasons. Andy, let's go to you with this one from Captain Kirk. With Hartman healthy, how long until he is inserted into the starting lineup, or do you see his role coming off the bench?
Well, I saw today that he's gotten taken off of minutes restriction, so I think that opens up some of the other possibilities a little bit more. I mean, I think he eventually works his way into the starting lineup, but I also don't know that there's a rush to do that at this point. The backcourt guys are playing well. And I think against teams that you can survive playing a 3-guard lineup, I think it's reasonable to do that. So he may be brought along slowly. And certainly if Sunday was any indication, he's a guy who could, provide a spark off the bench. But just some of the ways that he's been talked about in the offseason, I would struggle to believe that he wouldn't eventually work his way into the starting lineup, but don't necessarily think it's going to be on Friday for sure.
Will Colin Hartman miss a shot this year?
Because
right now,
I'm going to say
Are we counting?
I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes, maybe like a half court heave or something, but otherwise I can't see any way that happens.
Also, and let's just say this, and we mentioned this off air, especially with Archie, I think it's going to be a lot less important who starts and who finishes. And he's mentioned this. And it does sound like starting could be more of a reward for who practices the best. And then obviously who ends the game will depend more on matchups and who he trusts. So that's going to be a really interesting storyline to watch as we go through. Andy, we've got about a minute left. You want to give us your quick preview of Indiana State? And we should mention we did a more detailed preview at the end of our post-game show from the last exhibition game. So if you want a little bit more than what you'll get here, go there.
Yeah, so things to note would be that, they are picked, kind of consensus 8th is where they showed up in Missouri Valley. I did some averaging there. The 1 to 151 rankings are anywhere from 172 to, I think, 210. Guys to know, Brenton Scott, who's Bryson Scott's brother, who was on Fort Wayne last year. He led them in scoring a year ago, about 16 points a game. Scored in double figures in both their exhibition games. They got a sophomore point guard, Jordan Barnes, who played well as a freshman and has scored in double figures in their exhibition games, which were against Purdue and also against Marion. In looking through Blue Ribbon, they lost a lot of close games last year. 18 of 31 games decided in the last 2 minutes. Technically all games are decided in the last 2 minutes when the clock runs out, but so maybe they're no different than anybody else.
Very nice. Very nice. All righty. Well, that will do it for us on this episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording, or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com/join to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. We will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week, and of course, after Indiana State. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. Excellent. Well done, gentlemen.
All right.
All righty. So again, we're only doing 3 segments tonight. The Rob Phinisee interview will be inserted into the podcast, so definitely check that out. It's I don't know. I felt a lot better. I mean, it was my first chance being able to talk to him, but he just sounds like a very mature guy. The kind of answers that you would want to hear from a guy that you're thinking is going to come in and be a backup point guard and then eventually a starting point guard in your program for 4 years. So I'm excited about him. I'm excited about all the recruits. It's a darn good class.
They all give something.
Yeah, they do.
It's a
you just got to get that Romeo guy.
That Romeo guy.
Yeah, definitely might be, but I think I'd argue probably the most important class that he'll have. I mean, it's because it's so big that, those are going to be his guys and the foundation of this thing going forward for
a long time.
For the next 4 years for a lot of them, I would imagine. So,
well, and that's the thing is Race Thompson doesn't get thrown into this class either, technically. I mean, he's last year's class technically, but he's essentially on this class.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
that's interesting. All right, I got to get out of here, boys. Get back to work.
Okay, and Ryan, you're good for the show tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Andy may join us.
Yeah, I'll let you know when I get back from.
What time's the game? 7 Eastern.
Yeah,
7 Eastern. Yes,
that's what I thought.
7 Eastern, BTN Plus.
Means I got to go to the gym earlier. Okay. Yeah,
and eat some food. Be fed beforehand.
Probably won't be. Because it's 4:00 here. That's too early.
I got to deal with hangry Ryan all by myself.
After a workout, too, it's going to be even worse.
We better win.
Oh, dude. We lose
comfortably.
We're going to get angry Ryan anyway.
There were too many hangry Ryan games after losses last year.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, you didn't need to be hungry to be upset after those games. So.
It's fun to be so excited about a post-game show again because, man, the final 2 months last year were a drag.
Yeah.
At one point there was a time there were times when I was just legitimately actually on here saying, guys, do we have to do this? Like, this is voluntary, right? I'm not contracted to do. Like, do we have to?
Well, we essentially did the same show for like 8 games in a row. So it's
that was the thing. I was like, do we really have to talk about that? Can we talk about something else? Can we talk about anything, literally anything else?
We were straining for storylines, that's for sure.
Just get a thesaurus and come up with a different adjective for abysmal, and then
let's talk about the time I totaled my dad's car. Let's talk about the deaths of close family members. Anything. All right.
All right. Well, on that note,
Yeah.
let that be the
Yep.
last mention of last year. Let's turn the page.
Yeah.
Obviously, the inevitable comparisons will come up, but let's turn the page and look forward to a good era.
Yeah.
Good era of basketball coming up.
Seriously.
I'm excited about
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right, guys.
And people
All
right.
watching.
Thanks for being here, everybody. We will see you live tomorrow night for the postgame show.
Adios.
All right.
See y'all.
See you later.